You may have seen that shot in a few different shows, movies, and stuff in the past, but Severance does it a little bit different. And today we're gonna go over how to do the dolly zoom effect. So if you're only interested in learning how to do the effect, I'll put a little timestamp so you can click right on that. So you may have seen this effect used quite a bit in the show Severance, and it's used for a very specific purpose. In other shows and movies and stuff, it is used for a completely different use. So in the show Severance, we actually see it used to show a change of a person because we have two different people that are the same person. So it shows that change, and it uses a few different techniques inside of a dolly zoom to make you feel more in depth into what that actually is happening. So first, let's break down what a dolly zoom is. What a dolly zoom is when you move the camera away or towards a subject as you do the opposite in terms of zooming. So if you move away from a subject, you would zoom the camera in at the same time, or if you're moving towards the subject, you would zoom out as you come in, which ultimately makes the effect look really strange. And so what that does is it distorts the entire image and makes it look very warped and weird. Now, when Severance does it, it is very different because normally when you do a dolly zoom, you're going to have a huge background or like the mountains or something that is differently in the background. It's far away. Usually you don't have a wall that's literally right next to where we're shooting it. And the reason that they do this in Severance and it works so well is because when you start out at a wide angle like this right here, we have a wide angle lens. And so what it does is it makes my face nice and chubby. It makes me look wider because the wider your lens is, the kind of more distorted a person's face will look. So the other thing that makes it so unique the way they did it in Severance is that they had to do it perfectly. So the real key to making this work, which we'll get into when we talk about how to do this, is when you zoom in or out, you have to move the camera away from your subject at the exact right speed to keep the face in the exact same framing. Also, you want to keep your face in the center frame because it works a little bit better. But if you were to zoom out or zoom in faster or slower than you are moving the camera away, it will distort the image to a point where it looks kind of funky and like the subject is maybe moving backwards or forward. However, when Severance does it, they do it so perfectly, because they're obviously using robotics, that when they move the camera, it doesn't change the position of the person in the shot. So it works really well that way. And if you're using gear like I am, just a normal slider with a camera rig on a gimbal, it may not work as perfectly, but you can get some pretty good results. And it kind of works really nicely that way. Now, you could just literally move your camera away from you and towards you if you wanted to, however, whatever effect you're trying to go for, and then just do a post crop where you zoom in post. However, you really lose that distortion factor when you have that just the person's subject in the frame. If you had like a huge background or something that like really emphasized the dolly zoom or Zolly, that is when it would not really matter too much. But when you have a flat background and no other thing in the background that's going to be distorted, you can really tell on the face that it's not really changing much other than just having that minor effect. So you could do it with a phone or something, but you're not going to get the effect that you did in Severance unless you physically zoom in and out your camera as you move the camera back and forth. So keep that in mind. Realistically, all you kind of need is some sort of gear mechanism that can change your zoom on a zoom lens, and then you need a zoom lens and some sort of nice stabilized slider. If you don't have a slider, this isn't going to work as well, but you could use something like a towel and put a towel down and drag the towel. However, I'm using a motorized slider, which I actually ended up using it without the motor because I could do it much faster. This is such a slow motor that it didn't really work the way I wanted it to. So what I did here is I attached a focus motor to my actual zoom portion of my lens instead of the focus portion. And then I connected it to my gimbal because that's the best way for me to be able to control how fast it goes and how long it takes and do this automatically. Because if I can't do this automatically, that's gonna make life even harder. But after I did that, I just took this slider and I took my gimbal and I would set it to do its zoom. So I just used the menu here and I can pick the amount of time. So for this one specifically, I did 1 second or 2 seconds. They both kind of worked pretty nicely in that format. But once I had that figured out, what I did is I took off my actual motor and I would just literally push my slider back and forth manually. That way I could get my fast movement, because this slider does not have a fast motor. The other way you could do it is that you could even just put a string to this and just pull it. That way your face stays in frame, or if you have a second person that can help you, that's where you would have the second person do this movement while you stand in one place like this, and so you don't move. Because the key is you don't want to move your face or body other than the facial expressions that you may want to make. But if you move forward, backward, left, or right at all, it's really going to mess with the final look of the product. So you want as smooth as possible as a slider you can get. You're going to want something that can physically change your zoom, and then preferably a second person. That way that person can go like this and it can stop. For me, I did it all by myself and it was quite difficult, but if you can get it right, I would recommend doing it between 1 and 2 seconds long. So I would have the zoom change between 1 and 2 seconds, and I would go back and forth. Now, there's a few things to keep in mind when you're doing this effect so that you don't mess it up. Number one is you want to use a lens that is both wide and zoom. If you use something like a 15 to 35, that might be still too wide to get the effect you're looking for. According to a Google search, the show Severance used a 19 to 90 millimeter lens, which is absolutely perfect for this type of thing, because a 19 millimeter lens is going to look really wide right here, but 90 millimeters is going to look extremely tight. I'm using a 28 to 70, and I did between 28 and 50 mil for the effect, and I found that it worked really well. But the wider you can start and the zoomed in you can get on one lens is going to give you the best result. There's a few things to note while you're doing this effect. One of them is when you're moving things back and forth and zooming in at the same time, again, you have to do it at the exact right time as each other, or else you will look like you're in a different part of the frame, because you don't want your head to get bigger physically on frame or smaller. You want your head to stay the literal same size as it is at the beginning to the end. So if you change the focus and the distance too quickly or too little, you'll get a weird effect where your head gets literally bigger because you're zooming in either too fast or too slow. The other thing to note is to make sure you have smooth movements. If they're too wobbly like this, it's definitely not going to work when you go to make the actual thing. Zollies are pretty easy to do in general if you wanted to use it for a different aspect like you've seen in other parts of film in this video. But if you want to recreate this exact effect, there are specifics you need to follow that we went over. And if you don't, you might end up with something that looks like this. And these are my first tries that didn't work well. The last thing I wanted to note is that green screens don't work that well unless you work magic with green screen, or you go get your own clip of an elevator where you do a Zolly in the elevator as well. But at that point, you might as well just do the clip in the elevator unless you don't have access to that. And that's because, as you can see here in this clip, when they do the effect in Severance, not only does his face get distorted, but the actual lines in the elevator get distorted as well. So you start with a zoomed in or a zoomed out part of the elevator, and then it's the opposite when they're done. So if you don't have that effect on green screen video, you can't just put a picture of an elevator. It doesn't work. You need to have the same distortion to the elevator walls as you do to a person's face, or else it won't work. So you can tell it worked with my background here because it's a static background that's real, and it distorts it as I zoomed in and out. But if I were to do it on a green screen like you can see here, it definitely does not work because you're going to need another distortion video of an elevator, which it could work, but it might be more work than it's worth to get that shot of an elevator unless you have access to one quickly. But I hope this helped you learn how to do the Zolly effect in Severance if you want to use it in your own film. And don't judge me for the facial expressions I made at the beginning of this video. But hopefully that helps. Put some comments in the comment section down below about any questions you may have, and I'll see you guys on the next video.